Well, you look at Donald Trump, and people might not like much of what he says or does, particularly if they're against, him as a general principle. You can't pretend that he hasn't done a remarkable job in his first 3 weeks as president, which brings me to Kevin Tripp, news reporter at KABC Radio in Los Angeles, because, of course, he's been spending an awful lot of time, Donald Trump, in the last couple of days, talking about Russia, talking about making sure that there's peace in Ukraine. He's also been flailing around talking about tariffs, and he's particularly attacked the VAT, which is our kind of sales tax here. Kevin, very good morning to you. He's basically saying, VAT is like a tariff, so if it's 20% on all goods, which it is, and a lot of people here hate it, we're going to charge you 20% if you sell anything to us.
Yeah, that's his new salvo from his latest tariff threat that he issued a few hours ago. Although it's a bit mysterious and murky as to what these tariffs might be or might not be. Basically, what the president said was, we're going to issue reciprocal tariffs, as they're called. In other words, if there is a country which the president believes charges more for U.S. exports to that country than the U.S. charges for similar imports into the U.S., he wants to try to level the playing field. And he's considering VAT taxes to be a tariff in this sense. However, these tariffs he's talking about are not going to be implemented until April at the earliest, if at all. This sounds like a negotiating tactic. Donald Trump trying to get other nations to give the U.S. more favorable tariff and trade policy. But he was very vague about these tariffs. You see him signing something there, but what he signed basically just says, so we're going to negotiate more. We're going to try to get better deals. There was no specificity as to what these tariffs might be. Of course, in the past, he has issued some tariffs. China now has tariffs against them that are even larger than they were before. But he also backed off on tariffs against Mexico and Canada, our largest trading partners. So it remains to be seen whether these tariffs will be carried out in a few weeks, and if so, how large they will actually be.
Yeah. And again, it's very indicative, really, of how things are going in the White House. I mean, he is moving at a very rapid pace and covering an awful lot of ground on all sorts of things. He was visited yesterday by the leader of India. Let's have a look at what happened in one press conference there.
People in India will naturally welcome your decision to extradite Thakur Rana to India back home. In that context, I'd like to ask you a question about, in last few years, we have seen several groups in the US raising anti-India voice, calling about separation, terrorism activities in India. Do you think that should continue here in the US as well?
You're going to have to go louder.
Mr. President, people in India would be welcoming your decision to extradite Thakur Rana to...
I can't understand a word he's saying.
He can't understand a word he's saying. I mean, that, again, is something you wouldn't normally see in any kind of diplomatic scenario. He's breaking all the rules here, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for somebody being honest when they literally cannot understand the question. I mean, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of style. Some presidents might have said, I'm very sorry, sir. I actually can't understand your question.
Right.
Could somebody repeat it for me?
Right.
Donald Trump's got a more brash style, and I think that's what you're seeing on display there.
Absolutely right. I mean, big weekend coming up. I mean, notwithstanding whatever happens in the peace deal with Ukraine, but perhaps an even bigger deal coming up with what happens in Gaza if the hostages are not released by midday on Saturday. Donald Trump has already said, all hell will break loose. I think the Israelis have said that basically the gates of hell will open on Saturday. What's the feeling there in the US?
It's interesting because that story, while it is certainly discussed, isn't as front and center as some other international stories like trade in like Gaza or like trade in Ukraine, for instance. But the Gaza deal appears to be moving forward a little bit more. And what I mean by that is there seems to be movement with Hamas and Israel agreeing to continue the release of hostages on Saturday. It's not a done deal yet, but over the last 12 hours or so, there certainly have been indications that it looks like the Israeli hostages will continue to be released on Saturday. But as we all know with these peace deals, anything could happen over the next 24 hours.
No, of course. Kevin, good to see you. Have a good weekend. Thanks very much indeed. Kevin Tripp, news reporter at KABC Radio in Los Angeles.